Hey friends, I'm Jake. I met my wife, Emily, at a coffee shop in Chicago about 7 years ago. She was sitting by the window, reading a book, and I couldn't help but notice her. We started talking, and it turned out we had a lot in common. We both loved movies, hiking, and good food. After a few months of dating, I knew she was the one. We got married in a beautiful outdoor ceremony surrounded by friends and family. Life seemed perfect. For the first few years, everything was great. We bought a house, adopted a cat named Luna, and things were going smoothly. But around 2 years ago, I started noticing changes in Emily's behavior. She became more distant, spending hours on her phone, and she'd come home late from work with vague excuses. At first, I brushed it off as stress from her job, but looking back, those were red flags I should have paid more attention to. One evening, after a particularly long day at work, I came home early to surprise her. As I walked into our bedroom, I heard hushed voices coming from inside. Curious, I quietly opened the door and saw Emily on the bed, laughing and texting someone. I thought maybe she was just chatting with a friend, so I didn't think much of it at the time. But something about that moment stuck with me. Fast forward to last week. I was cleaning up some old boxes in the attic when I stumbled upon a hidden drawer in an old dresser. Inside, there were letters and photos, intimate ones that made my blood run cold. The letters were from someone named Matt, and the handwriting looked eerily familiar. It took me a moment to realize that Matt was my own brother. I was shocked, confused, and heartbroken all at once. How could this be happening? My own brother? The person I trusted the most, aside from Emily. The letters detailed their secret meetings, stolen moments, and even explicit descriptions of their sex. Reading those words felt like a punch to the gut. So, there I was, holding those damning letters and photos, my heart pounding in my chest like it was about to burst. My mind raced with questions, disbelief, and rage. How could Emily do this? And with Matt of all people? My brother. The one person I trusted implicitly. I felt betrayed on multiple levels, and the weight of that betrayal was crushing. I didn't know what to do at first. Should I confront her right away or wait for the right moment? But as the night wore on, I couldn't hold it in any longer. I needed answers, and I wasn't going to let her lie her way out of this. That evening, when Emily got home, she walked in like everything was normal. She greeted me with a kiss on the cheek and asked how my day was. It took everything in me not to explode right then and there. Instead, I waited until we were sitting down for dinner. I watched her take a bite of her food, completely oblivious to the storm brewing inside me. Emily, I said calmly, trying to keep my voice steady. We need to talk. She looked up from her plate, her eyes narrowing slightly. What's wrong now, Jake? You've been acting weird lately. I placed the letters and photos on the table between us. Her face went pale instantly. For a second, I thought she might bolt from the room, but instead, she just stared at them, her mouth hanging open in shock. What is this? She stammered, her voice trembling. Don't play dumb, Emily, I snapped, my patience wearing thin. These are letters from you and Matt. Detailed descriptions of your affair. How long has this been going on? For a moment, she was silent, her eyes darting around the room as if searching for an escape. Then, she leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms defensively. Jake, this isn't what it looks like, she said, her tone shifting to something more defiant. Matt and I, it's complicated. Complicated? I repeated, my voice rising. You call having sex with my brother complicated? What the hell, Emily? How could you do this to me? She sighed dramatically, rolling her eyes like I was overreacting. It's not like you're some saint, Jake. You've been distant for months. I needed someone who actually paid attention to me. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. She was trying to blame me for her cheating? The audacity. So, you decided to sleep with my brother because I wasn't paying enough attention? I shot back, my anger boiling over. That's your excuse? That's rich, Emily. Real rich. Her face hardened, and she stood up from the table, glaring at me. Fine, Jake. If you want to be like this, fine. But don't act like you're the victim here. This marriage hasn't been working for a while, and you know it. Before I could respond, she stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind her. I sat there, stunned, staring at the letters and photos scattered across the table. The reality of the situation hit me like a ton of bricks. My wife had cheated on me with my own brother, and now she was acting like I was the problem. I sat there in stunned silence, staring at the remnants of my life scattered across the table. Letters and photos that once held promises of love now lay twisted and broken, revealing a betrayal so deep it felt like a knife had been plunged into my chest. My mind was racing, trying to process what had just happened. Emily's words echoed in my head, "This marriage hasn't been working for a while." But how could she say that? How could she justify her actions with such cold indifference? I thought we were happy. Sure, things weren't perfect, but no relationship is. We had our ups and downs, but I never imagined anything like this. Not with Matt. Not with my own brother. The initial shock gave way to anger, a searing rage that coursed through every fiber of my being. How dare she? How dare they both betray me like this? My hands clenched into fists, nails digging into my palms as I tried to hold back the urge to scream. But beneath the anger, something darker began to take root: sadness. A deep, soul-crushing sadness that made my chest ache with each breath that I couldn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, all I could see was Emily with Matt. Their laughter, their stolen moments, their sex. It was like a movie playing on repeat inside my head, and I couldn't stop it. I tossed and turned, feeling more and more isolated with each passing hour. When dawn finally broke, I was exhausted, emotionally drained, and utterly heartbroken. The next morning, Emily avoided me like the plague. She barely looked at me, let alone spoke to me. It was like I wasn't even there. I tried to talk to her again, but she just shrugged me off, saying she needed space. Space? After everything she'd done, she wanted space. Days passed, and the tension between us grew thicker than ever. I found myself withdrawing, not wanting to engage in any conversation that might lead to another argument. Every time I looked at her, all I saw was her lying face, her bitchy attitude, and her blatant disregard for my feelings. It was suffocating. One evening, I decided to go for a walk to clear my head. The cool autumn air hit my face, and for the first time in days, I felt a semblance of peace. As I walked through the neighborhood, I replayed every moment leading up to this point. Had I missed signs? Was there something I could have done differently? The guilt gnawed at me, making me question everything about our relationship, but then I realized something important: this wasn't my fault. No matter how distant or preoccupied I may have been, nothing justified what Emily did. Cheating is a choice, and she chose to betray me with my own brother. That fact alone was unforgivable. As the days turned into weeks, the anger slowly started to fade, replaced by a deep sadness and a sense of loss. I mourned the relationship we once had, the trust we built, and the future we planned together. It was like watching someone you love die, except they were still alive, walking around like nothing had changed. A few weeks had passed since the confrontation, and I was still reeling from the emotional roller coaster. The house felt like a tomb, every room echoing with memories of what we once had. Emily and I barely spoke anymore, our interactions reduced to curt nods or one-word answers. She'd taken to spending more time away from home, often coming back late at night, sometimes not at all. I didn't even ask where she went anymore. I knew the silence between us was deafening, but it gave me time to think. To really consider what I wanted moving forward. Could I ever trust her again? Could I look at her without seeing Matt's face, knowing what they had done behind my back? The answer, as much as I tried to ignore it, was no. One evening, after another sleepless night, I sat down at our dining table, the same place where everything had unraveled just a few weeks ago. I pulled out a notebook and started writing. I listed all the reasons why staying in this marriage made sense: our shared history, the life we built together, the memories. But then I wrote down the reasons for leaving. Trust broken beyond repair. Betrayal by someone I loved and trusted implicitly. And worst of all, betrayal by my own brother. As I read through the list, the weight of reality settled on my shoulders. There was no way I could stay in this marriage. Not after everything that had happened. It wasn't about pride or revenge, it was about self-respect. I couldn't live in a relationship where I constantly questioned every move she made, every word she said. I needed closure, and I needed to move on. The next morning, I waited until Emily was home. When she walked through the door, I stood up from the couch, my heart pounding in my chest. She looked surprised to see me there, probably expecting me to be at work. "We need to talk," I said, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside me. She sighed, rolling her eyes like she always did when she didn't want to deal with something. "What now, Jake?" I took a deep breath, trying to keep my emotions in check. "Emily, I've thought long and hard about this. About us. And I can't do this anymore." Her expression changed instantly, shifting from indifference to anger. "Do what? What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about ending this marriage," I said firmly. "I can't trust you anymore. Not after what you did with Matt. I don't know if I'll ever be able to." She crossed her arms, her face turning red with fury. "So, this is it? You're just going to give up on us because of one mistake?" "One mistake?" I repeated, incredulous. "This isn't a mistake, Emily. This is a choice. You chose to betray me, to have sex with my brother. How can you call that a mistake?" She opened her mouth to argue, but then stopped, realizing she had no defense. Instead, she turned away, her shoulders slumping in defeat. For the first time since this whole nightmare began, I saw a glimmer of regret in her eyes. But it was too little, too late. "I'm leaving," I continued, my voice softer now. "I'm packing my things and finding somewhere else to stay. We can figure out the details later, but right now, I need space. I need time to heal." Without waiting for a response, I walked into our bedroom and started packing a bag. Clothes, toiletries, anything I could carry. As I zipped up the bag, I felt an overwhelming sense of relief. It was finally over. The toxic cycle of lies and betrayal was breaking, and I was free. When I came back out, Emily was sitting on the couch, staring blankly at the wall. She didn't say a word as I grabbed my keys and headed for the door. Before I left, I turned around one last time. "Goodbye, Emily," I said quietly. "Take care of yourself." And with that, I walked out, closing the door on the life we once had. Walking out that door felt like stepping into a new world. The air outside was crisp, the sky clear, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I could breathe again. It wasn't an immediate relief. There was still pain, still anger, but it was different now. It was a manageable kind of hurt, one that I knew I could eventually heal from. I drove to a nearby hotel, checking into a room with nothing but my bag and my thoughts. As I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the blank wall, I began to reflect on everything that had happened. How did I get here? What lessons could I take away from this mess? The first thing that hit me was how blind I had been. Not to the affair itself that was undeniable, but to the cracks in our relationship. Emily had been right about one thing: we hadn't been communicating well for months before the betrayal. I had been so focused on work, on life's daily grind, that I hadn't noticed her pulling away. And maybe, just maybe, if I had been more attentive, things could have turned out differently. But hindsight is always 20/20ths, isn't it? Then there was the issue of trust. Trust is the foundation of any relationship, and once it's broken, it's nearly impossible to rebuild. No matter how much I wanted to believe that Emily's actions were just a mistake, deep down, I knew better. She had chosen to betray me, not just once, but repeatedly, with my own brother. That kind of betrayal cuts deeper than anything else. There was no coming back from that. As the days passed, I found myself talking to friends and family about what had happened. Some were shocked, others sympathetic, but all of them offered advice. One friend, in particular, said something that stuck with me: "You can't control other people's actions, Jake, but you can control your response to them." It was simple, but profound. I couldn't change what Emily or Matt had done, but I could decide how I moved forward. One night, as I lay in bed scrolling through Reddit, I stumbled upon a thread about infidelity and betrayal. Reading through the stories of others who had gone through similar situations made me realize that I wasn't alone. So many people had experienced the same heartache, the same feelings of betrayal and loss. And yet, many of them had managed to find peace, to move on and build new lives for themselves. That gave me hope. If they could do it, so could I. As the weeks went by, I started making small changes in my life. I joined a gym, started reading books I'd been meaning to get to, and even reconnected with old friends I hadn't seen in years. Slowly but surely, I began to rediscover who I was outside of my marriage. It wasn't easy. There were days when the pain would come flooding back, and I'd find myself questioning every decision I'd made. But I kept pushing forward, reminding myself that healing takes time. One evening, while sitting on a park bench watching the sunset, I realized something important. This experience, as painful as it was, had taught me invaluable lessons. I learned the importance of communication, the value of trust, and the strength it takes to walk away from something toxic. More importantly, I learned that I deserved better. I deserved to be treated with respect, honesty, and love. So, if I could offer any advice to anyone going through something similar, it would be this: don't be afraid to walk away. It's okay to admit when a relationship has run its course. It's okay to prioritize your own happiness and well-being. And most importantly, remember that healing takes time. Be patient with yourself, and don't rush the process. After a few weeks of staying at the hotel, I realized that I needed a more permanent solution. Living out of a suitcase was starting to take its toll on me both mentally and physically. So, I decided it was time to find an apartment. I spent my weekends driving around town, looking at different listings. It felt strange to be house hunting again, but this time it was for myself, not for us. The process was cathartic in a way. It gave me something concrete to focus on, something positive amidst all the chaos. Eventually, I found a cozy one-bedroom apartment near a park. It wasn't much, but it was mine. A fresh start. Moving in was bittersweet. As I unpacked my boxes, memories of Emily kept creeping up: our wedding photo, a framed picture from our honeymoon, even some of her old clothes I had forgotten about. Each item felt like a punch to the gut, reminding me of what I had lost. But instead of dwelling on them, I made a conscious decision to let go. I donated most of her belongings to charity and packed away the rest in a box labeled "Memories." It was a symbolic gesture, but it helped me move forward. Once I settled into my new place, I started focusing on self-improvement. I knew that if I wanted to heal properly, I needed to take care of myself both physically and emotionally. I joined a gym nearby and started going every morning before work. At first, it was just about getting in shape, but soon enough, it became my sanctuary. The physical exertion helped clear my mind, and I found solace in the routine. That I also began seeing a therapist. Initially, I was hesitant. I didn't want to seem weak or vulnerable. But after a few sessions, I realized how beneficial it was to talk things through with someone who wasn't directly involved in the situation. My therapist helped me understand my emotions better, guiding me through the stages of grief and anger. She reminded me that it was okay to feel hurt and angry, but she also encouraged me to channel those feelings into something constructive. Another crucial step in my healing journey was reconnecting with friends and family. During the worst of the ordeal, I had isolated myself, too ashamed and broken to reach out. But once I started opening up, I realized how much support I had. My best friend, Alex, invited me over for dinner almost every weekend. We'd grill burgers, watch sports, and just hang out like we used to. Those evenings were exactly what I needed, a reminder that life could still be fun and enjoyable, that I also rekindled a hobby I had long neglected, painting. In college, I used to spend hours in the art studio, losing myself in colors and textures. After graduation, life got busy, and I eventually stopped making time for it. Now, with the extra space in my new apartment, I set up a small corner as a makeshift studio. Painting became my escape, a way to express the emotions I couldn't put into words. Every brushstroke was therapeutic, helping me process the pain and confusion I was feeling. As the months went by, I noticed a shift in my mindset. I no longer felt consumed by anger and sadness. Instead, I began to feel hopeful. Hopeful that I could rebuild my life, hopeful that I could find happiness again. It wasn't an overnight transformation by any means, but slowly, day by day, I was getting there. One evening, while flipping through a magazine, I came across an article about mindfulness and meditation. Intrigued, I decided to give it a try. I downloaded a guided meditation app and started practicing every night before bed. At first, it was difficult to quiet my mind, especially with all the lingering thoughts about Emily and Matt. But with consistent practice, I gradually learned to let go of those intrusive thoughts and focus on the present moment. Meditation became another tool in my arsenal, helping me stay grounded and centered. The legal aspects of the divorce were another challenge altogether. Dividing assets, deciding custody arrangements for Luna, our cat, and finalizing the paperwork took longer than expected. There were moments when I felt like giving up, but I reminded myself that it was necessary to close this chapter of my life. With the help of a good lawyer, we managed to settle everything amicably. Emily and I agreed to sell the house and split the proceeds evenly. It wasn't easy, but it was the right thing to do. Looking back, I realized that rebuilding my life after the betrayal was a gradual process. It required patience, perseverance, and a willingness to embrace change. There were setbacks along the way, days when I felt like I was back at square one. But each time, I picked myself up and kept moving forward. As the dust began to settle on my divorce, I started thinking about dating again. It wasn't something I had planned right away. In fact, it was something I had been actively avoiding. The idea of opening myself up to someone new, after everything that had happened with Emily and Matt, felt terrifying. But as time passed and I grew more comfortable with myself, I realized that I didn't want to spend the rest of my life alone. I wanted to love again, to trust again, even if it scared me. So, one evening, after a particularly good session of painting, I decided to dip my toes into the dating pool. I signed up for a few dating apps: Tinder, Bumble, Hinge, just to see what was out there. At first, it felt awkward and strange, like I was back in high school all over again. Swiping through profiles, crafting witty messages, and trying to figure out how to present myself in just the right way. But eventually, I got the hang of it. The first few dates were, well, let's just say they were a learning curve. There was Sarah, who spent the entire dinner talking about her ex-boyfriend and how he still texted her every day. Then there was Mike, who seemed charming at first but turned out to be a complete narcissist, constantly bragging about his job and his car. And don't even get me started on Jenna, who showed up half an hour late, ordered 3 courses, and then left without offering to split the bill. Each date was a reminder that dating in your 30s is a whole different ballgame. People come with baggage, emotional scars, past relationships, insecurities, and navigating that can be tricky. But despite the initial setbacks, I kept going. I reminded myself that finding the right person takes time, and not everyone is going to be a perfect fit. One night, after yet another disappointing date, I found myself sitting at a bar, nursing a drink and feeling sorry for myself. As I scrolled through my phone, I noticed a message from someone named Laura. We had matched a few days earlier, but I hadn't really given her much thought. Her profile was simple, no long-winded bios or overly curated photos, but there was something about her that caught my eye. Maybe it was the genuine smile in her pictures, or the fact that she listed hiking as one of her hobbies. Whatever it was, I decided to give her a chance. That we messaged back and forth for a while, getting to know each other before deciding to meet in person. When the day finally came, I was nervous but excited. I met Laura at a local coffee shop, and from the moment she walked in, I knew this was different. She was warm, friendly, and easy to talk to. We spent hours chatting about everything from our favorite movies to our dreams for the future. For the first time in a long time, I felt genuinely connected to someone, but as the conversation progressed, the inevitable question came up: what happened with your marriage? I had been dreading this moment, unsure of how to explain the situation without sounding bitter or broken. But instead of brushing it off or lying, I decided to be honest. I told Laura about Emily, about the betrayal, about the pain and anger I had gone through. To my surprise, she listened without judgment, offering empathy and understanding. "I'm really sorry you had to go through that," she said softly. "It sounds like it was incredibly difficult." Her response caught me off guard. In all my previous dates, when I had mentioned the divorce, people either changed the subject or gave me unsolicited advice. But Laura's compassion made me feel seen, heard, and validated. It was refreshing, and it gave me hope that maybe, just maybe, I could find someone who truly understood me. Over the next few weeks, Laura and I continued to see each other. Each date felt more natural, more comfortable than the last. We went hiking, explored art galleries, and even tried cooking together. Slowly but surely, I began to let my guard down, allowing myself to be vulnerable with her. Of course, there were still moments of doubt. Old fears would creep up, reminding me of what had happened with Emily and Matt. What if history repeated itself? What if I opened my heart only to have it shattered again? But Laura's patience and kindness helped ease those fears. She never pushed me to move too fast, always respecting my boundaries and giving me space when I needed it. One evening, as we sat on her couch watching a movie, she turned to me and said, "Jake, I know things haven't been easy for you, but I want you to know that I'm here for you. No matter what happens, I'll support you." Her words hit me hard. It had been so long since someone had shown me that kind of unconditional support. With Emily, everything had always felt conditional, like I had to earn her love and attention. But with Laura, it was different. She accepted me for who I was, flaws and all. As the months went by, Laura and I grew closer. Our relationship wasn't perfect. There were still challenges and disagreements, but we worked through them together. And for the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful about the future. Maybe love wasn't dead after all. Even as my relationship with Laura blossomed, there was a part of me that couldn't fully shake the past. The betrayal by Emily and Matt had left deep scars, and no matter how much I tried to move forward, the weight of those memories still lingered. There were nights when I'd wake up in a cold sweat, reliving the moment I discovered the letters, the photos, the explicit details of their affair. And during the day, random triggers would set off waves of anger and resentment. Seeing Matt's face on social media, hearing Emily's name mentioned in passing. It wasn't just the betrayal itself that haunted me, it was the betrayal by someone who was supposed to be family. My own brother. The person I trusted more than anyone else. The thought of them together, laughing, having sex, it made my stomach churn every time it crossed my mind. And while I knew intellectually that dwelling on it wouldn't change anything, emotionally, I couldn't help but feel consumed by it. Laura noticed the toll it was taking on me. She'd often find me lost in thought, staring blankly at the wall or snapping at her over the smallest things. One evening, after I had lashed out at her for something trivial, she sat me down and said, "Jake, you need to talk about this. You can't keep bottling it up." I didn't want to burden her with my baggage, but she was right. If I wanted to truly heal, I needed to confront these feelings head-on. So, I started opening up to her more, sharing the raw, ugly parts of my story. The nights I cried myself to sleep, the moments when I questioned whether I deserved better, the times I felt like I could never trust anyone again, but talking about it only got me so far. What I really needed was closure. And to get that, I had to face the people who had caused me so much pain. The first step was confronting Matt. We hadn't spoken since the divorce, and honestly, I had avoided him like the plague. But one day, I decided enough was enough. I called him up and asked if we could meet. He sounded surprised but agreed to meet me at a local park. When I arrived, he was already there, pacing nervously by the playground. Seeing him brought back a flood of emotions: anger, betrayal, disappointment. But I took a deep breath and reminded myself why I was there. "Hey," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Jake," he replied, his eyes avoiding mine. "Look, I know you're probably here to yell at me, and I get it. I deserve it." I nodded, biting back the urge to unleash everything I had been holding in. Instead, I took a seat on a nearby bench and motioned for him to join me. "I'm not here to yell," I said slowly. "I'm here because I need to understand. How could you do this? How could you betray me like that?" Matt sighed, running a hand through his hair. "There's no excuse, Jake. I was wrong. I let my feelings for Emily cloud my judgment, and I made a huge mistake. I'm sorry." His apology felt hollow, almost rehearsed. It was clear he was trying to minimize what he did, to make it seem like a lapse in judgment rather than a calculated betrayal. But I wasn't buying it. "You slept with my wife, Matt. You had sex with her behind my back. That's not just a mistake. That's a choice. A conscious decision to hurt me." He looked down, unable to meet my gaze. "I know. And I regret it every day. I wish I could take it back, but I can't." For a moment, I considered letting him have it, telling him exactly how much he had destroyed me, how much pain he had caused. But then I realized something important: yelling at him wouldn't change anything. It wouldn't erase the past or make me feel any better. All it would do is keep me stuck in that toxic cycle of anger and resentment. "So instead," I said, "I don't know if I'll ever be able to forgive you, Matt. But I'm done letting this eat away at me. I'm moving on, and you should too." With that, I stood up and walked away, leaving him sitting there on the bench. It wasn't a dramatic confrontation, but it was enough. Enough to finally let go of some of the weight I had been carrying. Next came Emily. Confronting her was even harder. Unlike Matt, she wasn't remorseful. In fact, she seemed almost indifferent to the whole thing, which only fueled my anger. But I knew I had to try. We met at a neutral location, a coffee shop downtown. When she walked in, she looked different, thinner, more tired. But her attitude hadn't changed. "Why are we here, Jake?" she asked, sipping her coffee without looking at me. "I wanted to talk," I said, my voice firm but controlled. "About everything. About what happened between us." She rolled her eyes, a familiar gesture that used to drive me crazy. "What's there to talk about? It's over. We're done." "I get that," I replied. "But I need to understand. Why did you do it? Why did you choose Matt?" Emily shrugged, her expression cold. "You weren't paying attention to me, Jake. You were always working, always busy. I needed someone who actually cared about me." Her words stung, but they also rang hollow. She was deflecting, trying to shift the blame onto me. But I wasn't going to let her get away with that. "So, your solution was to cheat on me with my brother?" I shot back. "That doesn't make sense, Emily. That's not fixing anything. That's destroying everything." She leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms. "Maybe I made a mistake. But what's done is done. You can't change it." "No, I can't," I agreed. "But I can decide how I move forward. And I've decided that I'm done letting you control my life. I'm done feeling guilty, done feeling angry. I'm moving on, Emily. And you should too." Her face hardened, but she didn't argue. Maybe deep down, she knew I was right. Or maybe she just didn't care anymore. Either way, it didn't matter. What mattered was that I had finally found the strength to walk away from her toxic influence. In the weeks that followed, I worked hard on forgiving, not for Emily's or Matt's sake, but for mine. Forgiveness wasn't about excusing their actions or pretending everything was okay. It was about releasing the hold they had on me, about freeing myself from the chains of bitterness and resentment, and slowly, bit by bit, I began to heal. The anger faded, replaced by a sense of peace. I realized that I didn't need their apologies or their validation. All I needed was to let go. After the confrontations with Emily and Matt, I felt a strange sense of liberation. It was as if a weight had been lifted off my shoulders, allowing me to breathe again. But even with that newfound freedom, there was still an emptiness inside, a void left by the years spent defining myself through my marriage to Emily. Who was I outside of being her husband? What made Jake, just Jake, worthy of love and respect? These questions gnawed at me for weeks. I knew that if I wanted to truly move forward, I needed to rediscover who I was without the shadow of my failed relationship looming over me. So, I made a conscious decision to focus on self-improvement and personal growth. The first step was reconnecting with old hobbies and passions that I had long neglected. Before Emily and I got married, I used to be an avid runner. Every weekend, I'd wake up early, lace up my sneakers, and hit the trails for hours. It wasn't just about staying fit, it was about clearing my mind, finding peace in the rhythm of my footsteps. But somewhere along the way, between work commitments and household responsibilities, running fell by the wayside. Now, I decided to pick it back up. That first run was brutal. My legs felt heavy, my lungs burned, and I had to stop multiple times to catch my breath. But as I pushed through, something miraculous happened. With each step, I felt more connected to myself, more grounded. By the time I finished, I was drenched in sweat but also filled with a sense of accomplishment. It was a small victory, but it was mine. From that day on, running became a regular part of my routine. I started setting goals, first 5 miles, then 10, eventually working my way up to half marathons. Each milestone reminded me of my strength, my resilience. I wasn't defined by my past failures or the actions of others. I was capable of achieving great things on my own, but physical fitness was only one piece of the puzzle. I also knew that if I wanted to rebuild my self-worth, I needed to challenge myself mentally and emotionally. So, I enrolled in a few online courses: photography, creative writing, even a beginner's class on coding. These weren't just random interests, they were skills I had always wanted to learn but never had the time or motivation to pursue. Now, with no distractions from a failing marriage, I dove into them headfirst. Learning new things was exhilarating. It gave me a sense of purpose, a reason to get out of bed each morning beyond just going through the motions. Photography, in particular, became a form of therapy for me. There was something deeply satisfying about capturing moments, freezing them in time, and seeing the world through a different lens. It helped me appreciate the beauty around me, even when life felt chaotic and uncertain. As I immersed myself in these activities, I began to notice a shift in how I viewed myself. I wasn't just the guy whose wife cheated on him. I was a runner, a photographer, a writer, a learner. I was someone who was constantly growing, evolving, becoming better. And most importantly, I was someone who deserved love and happiness. But rebuilding my self-worth wasn't just about what I did, it was also about how I thought about myself. For so long, I had internalized the negative messages Emily had sent my way: "You're not enough, you don't pay attention, you're boring." Those words had seeped into my subconscious, shaping how I saw myself. Now, I had to actively work on rewiring those thoughts. I started journaling every night before bed, writing down 3 things I was grateful for and 3 positive affirmations about myself. At first, it felt awkward and forced. Saying things like, "I am worthy of love," or "I am strong and resilient," felt like a lie. But over time, those affirmations began to sink in. They became a mantra, a reminder that I didn't need anyone else's validation to feel good about myself. Another crucial aspect of this journey was learning to set boundaries. In my marriage, I had often let Emily walk all over me, sacrificing my own needs and desires to keep the peace. But now, I was determined to prioritize my well-being. If something didn't feel right, I spoke up. If I needed space, I took it. I stopped apologizing for taking care of myself and started embracing the idea that my needs mattered just as much as anyone else's. This newfound assertiveness extended to my relationships with friends and family as well. I stopped engaging in toxic dynamics, distancing myself from people who drained my energy or made me feel bad about myself. Instead, I surrounded myself with individuals who uplifted me, who celebrated my successes and supported me through my struggles. Having a strong support system made all the difference in my healing process. One of the most significant changes came when I finally stopped comparing myself to others. It was easy to fall into the trap of thinking that everyone else had their lives together while I was struggling to put the pieces back together. But the truth is, nobody's life is perfect. Everyone has their own battles to fight, their own demons to face. Once I accepted that, I stopped measuring my worth by external standards and started focusing on my own journey. As the months went by, I noticed a profound shift in how I felt about myself. I no longer cringed when I looked in the mirror or questioned whether I was deserving of love. Instead, I stood tall, proud of who I had become. I had faced the darkest parts of my life and emerged stronger, wiser, and more self-assured, and perhaps most importantly, I learned that my value wasn't tied to anyone else's opinion of me, not Emily's, not Matt's, not anyone's. My worth came from within, from the effort I put into becoming the best version of myself. As I continued to rebuild my self-worth and rediscover my identity, Laura remained a constant source of support and encouragement. Our relationship had grown stronger over time, but it wasn't without its challenges. Dating someone new while still processing the trauma of my past was no easy feat. There were moments when old fears and insecurities would resurface, threatening to derail everything we had built together. One evening, after a particularly stressful day at work, I found myself spiraling. A minor disagreement with Laura about something trivial, what to have for dinner, had triggered a wave of anxiety. My mind immediately jumped to worst-case scenarios. What if she leaves me? What if she's just like Emily? What if I'm not enough? I could feel the panic rising in my chest, my breaths becoming shallow and rapid. Laura noticed something was wrong and gently placed her hand on my arm. "Jake, what's going on?" she asked, her voice filled with concern. "I don't know," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. I can't stop thinking about how things ended with Emily. What if this happens again?" Laura's expression softened as she pulled me into a hug. "Hey, listen to me. You're not your past. And I'm not Emily. We're building something different here, something real." Her words helped calm me down, but they also made me realize that I needed to be more open with her about my struggles. So, that night, we sat down and had a long, honest conversation about my fears and insecurities. It wasn't easy. I had to confront some painful memories, but talking about it with Laura felt liberating. She listened without judgment, offering empathy and understanding instead of criticism or frustration. From that moment on, we made a conscious effort to communicate openly and honestly with each other. Whenever I felt anxious or triggered by something from my past, I didn't bottle it up, I shared it with Laura. And she did the same. We worked together to create a safe space where we could both express our feelings without fear of judgment or rejection. One of the biggest hurdles we faced was learning to trust each other. Trust had been shattered in my previous relationship, and rebuilding it wasn't going to happen overnight. But Laura was patient and understanding, never pushing me to move faster than I was ready for. Instead, she showed me through her actions that she was committed to our relationship and to earning my trust. For example, there were times when I'd ask her where she was going or who she was spending time with, not because I didn't trust her, but because the fear of betrayal was still fresh in my mind. Rather than getting defensive or annoyed, Laura would calmly explain her plans and even send me updates throughout the day. Over time, These small gestures helped ease my anxieties and reinforce the trust between us. Another important aspect of our relationship was setting healthy boundaries. After years of neglecting my own needs in my marriage to Emily, I was determined to prioritize self-care and mutual respect in my relationship with Laura. We made it a point to discuss our expectations, limits, and desires early on, ensuring that we were both on the same page. This meant being upfront about things like personal space, communication styles, and emotional needs. For instance, I told Laura that I needed time alone to recharge after a long day, and she respected that. In return, I made an effort to be more present and attentive when we were together, putting away distractions like my phone and focusing solely on her. We also worked on developing a strong foundation of mutual respect. This meant valuing each other's opinions, supporting each other's goals, and treating each other with kindness and compassion even during disagreements. When conflicts arose, we approached them as a team rather than adversaries. Instead of resorting to blame or defensiveness, we focused on finding solutions that worked for both of us. One of the most rewarding aspects of our relationship was watching it grow and evolve over time. As we continued to build trust and deepen our connection, I began to see Laura not just as a partner, but as a best friend, a person who truly understood me and supported me in every way. We shared laughter, tears, and countless moments of joy, creating a bond that felt unbreakable. Of course, there were still challenges along the way. There were days when the pain of my past would resurface, reminding me of everything I had lost. But with Laura by my side, I was able to face those challenges head-on, knowing that I wasn't alone. She reminded me that healing is a journey, not a destination, and that it's okay to take things one step at a time. As the months turned into years, I found myself feeling more content and fulfilled than I ever had before. The scars of my past were still there, but they no longer defined me. I had learned to accept them as part of my story, using them as motivation to become a better person and a stronger partner. Reflecting on everything I've been through, I've come to realize several important lessons. First and foremost, I learned that healing takes time, and that's okay. There's no set timeline for recovery, and everyone's journey is different. It's important to be patient with yourself and allow yourself the space to grieve, process, and grow. I also learned the value of self-worth and self-love. No matter what happens in life, you are worthy of love and happiness regardless of anyone else's opinion. Your worth comes from within, from the effort you put into becoming the best version of yourself. Lastly, I learned that trust and communication are the cornerstones of any healthy relationship. Without trust, there can be no intimacy or connection. And without open, honest communication, misunderstandings and resentment will fester. By prioritizing these values in my relationship with Laura, I was able to build something truly special, one that was based on mutual respect, understanding, and unconditional love. In closing, if there's one piece of advice I can offer to others who find themselves in similar situations, it's this: don't be afraid to walk away from something toxic. It's okay to prioritize your own happiness and well-being. Healing is possible, and a brighter future awaits you. Surround yourself with people who uplift and support you, and never give up on finding love and happiness, because you deserve it. And remember, no matter how dark the night may seem, the dawn always follows.